My brother smiled as he kicked me out of the company our father built. 6 months later, I made sure no one would dare speak his name again. I was 45 when I realized blood had an expiration date. They say family is forever. That blood runs deeper than loyalty, deeper than truth, deeper even than betrayal. But they don't talk about what happens when that blood turns cold, when the same hands that once clung to yours under the dinner table now tighten around your throat in the boardroom. I learned that lesson the hard way, 2 months before Brad made his move. At Ellison & Company, I wasn't just a senior project director. I was the man who had poured his spine into the concrete of every structure we raised. 22 years. 16 towers. 37 major contracts. I didn't build the company, my father did. But I was the one who kept it breathing, day in and day out, through recessions, shortages, and competition that would have eaten a weaker firm alive. I wasn't the one in the spotlight, but I made damn sure there was a spotlight to stand in. Brad? Brad was the golden son. 4 years younger, cleaner cut, sharper suits. He came back from Wharton with polished teeth and rehearsed charm, all shine and zero dirt. My brother had never scraped rust off rebar at 4 a.m. He'd never sat through a 12-hour shift in the July sun because the concrete didn't care about your heatstroke. He didn't build, he presented. 2 months before the betrayal, Brad was promoted to CEO. It wasn't a shock. Dad had stepped back after his second heart surgery and the board, mostly composed of old friends and safer men, nodded along. Brad had vision, they said. He knew markets. He spoke the language of expansion and modernity. I just managed projects. A hammer in a suit. It was a Tuesday when the first crack showed. Family dinner, Dad's idea, to keep us grounded. We sat around the mahogany table that had seen more silent wars than celebrations. Mom brought out the roast. Dad carved. I poured the wine. Brad, as always, checked his phone more than he looked up. He said all the right things to Mom. Told Dad he admired his legacy. Said he wanted to evolve the brand while respecting the foundation. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. I could hear the rehearsed pitch behind every word. And then, when Dad stepped outside to take a call from his doctor, Brad leaned in, just enough for me to hear. If you can't keep up, Mark, maybe you should step aside before someone does it for you. He didn't even look at me when he said it. Just kept swirling his wine like he was waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. Instead, I started watching. He'd been bringing in new consultants, none of whom I was ever introduced to. Financial teams with no construction experience. Strategy sessions scheduled without me. Project meetings rescheduled or cancelled, only for me to find out later they'd happened without me in another room. It wasn't paranoia. I had years of blueprints and instincts built into my bones. Something was shifting under the foundation. So I did something I hadn't done in 2 decades. I read the financials. Late at night, in the office I used to call mine, I combed through Brad's proposals. At first, it was the usual: growth plans, market expansions, investor presentations. Glossy slides. Jargon that sounded impressive and said nothing. But deeper in the folders, I found something that made my stomach twist. He was taking out loans. Big ones. Secured by future projects that hadn't even been awarded yet. Brad was betting the company's future on deals we hadn't signed, on contracts he assumed would go through. He was leveraging Ellison & Company like a gambler with a forged check. Worse, he had already included revenue from those unbuilt projects in financial forecasts to the board. To the banks. To our father. He was building a tower of cards, and I was the only one who saw the wind coming. I confronted him once, quietly, behind closed doors, away from Dad. I remember standing in his sleek, glass-paneled corner office, the one that used to be my father's. "You're mortgaging our future on dreams, Brad." He didn't even blink. Just smiled and said, "You never understood how the real world works, Mark. It's not about what's built. It's about what people believe you will build." That was the moment I knew. He didn't want a company. He wanted a story to sell. And I was no longer part of it. In the weeks that followed, things escalated. My name was quietly removed from client decks. My calendar emptied itself. Project managers I had trained were suddenly answering to restructured lines of communication. I heard rumors, whispers in the halls, that I was resistant to change. That I lacked strategic alignment. The same words I found quoted later in a leaked press memo Brad gave to Build Vision Weekly, hinting at an upcoming generational pivot. He wasn't just replacing me. He was rewriting the narrative. And I had a choice: go quietly, or prepare for war. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't give him the scene he wanted. What I did, instead, was start planning something far more permanent than revenge. I started building. Not with cranes or permits. But with silence. With patience. With everything he had taken for granted. He thought I was just another relic of Dad's generation. He forgot that I was the one who knew where every beam in this company was buried. And if he was going to burn the house down, I'd make damn sure he was inside when it collapsed. They chose a Thursday. Cold, overcast, and silent, the kind of day that presses against your skin like wet stone. I remember the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Ellison and Company boardroom, how the air felt recycled and stale, like it already knew what was coming. The meeting had been called under the guise of a quarterly strategy review. But I could feel it, beneath the surface, something rotten pulsed. 12 seats around the polished oak table. 11 faces I had known for years. Some had worked with my father. Some owed their careers to him. To me. To the years I spent hauling this company through every storm it ever weathered. And yet, as I sat at the far end of that table, the seat I'd filled for over a decade, not a single one of them would meet my eyes. Brad walked in late, of course. Designer coat. No tie. Collar open like he had nothing to prove. He set his laptop down with a soft thud, then flashed the room that trademark grin, bright, rehearsed, hollow. "Let's get started," he said, like he was offering coffee, not a noose. The presentation was just smoke. Numbers thrown up on the screen, projections, investments, words like scalability and vertical integration that meant nothing to the men who actually laid concrete. I kept quiet. I'd seen all of it before. I'd read the plans. The lies. Then, like an actor hitting his cue, Brad leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and turned to the board. "There comes a time," he said, "when a company has to choose between comfort and courage. Between tradition and transformation." He looked directly at me. "And to move forward, we need bold vision, not backward momentum. We need fresh blood, not old sentiment." Then he smiled. "I'm proposing we restructure senior operations. That includes phasing out the role of senior project director as it currently exists." The words dropped like a steel beam. Silence. Utter, suffocating silence. I looked around the room. Carl, my uncle, my godfather, stared down at his hands, ringing his wedding band with pale knuckles. Lisa from legal avoided eye contact. Mike from finance coughed into his sleeve. Not a single voice. Not even a murmur. Brad was still smiling. He was savoring it. The performance. The optics. The show of dominance. And I realized then, it had never been about vision. Not about growth. It was about power. A calculated, public execution, designed to humiliate me in front of the very people I helped build into leaders. I let the silence stretch. Then I stood, buttoned my jacket, and ran my palm once over the surface of the table. My father's table. The one he built by hand in the winter of 1986 because the company was too poor to buy one. I remembered the wood shavings in our garage. The splinters in his fingers. I looked at Brad. "That's bold," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Good luck." Then I turned to leave. No slamming doors. No raised voices. Just silence, again. But this time, it clung to the room like smoke. The silence of cowards. As I reached the doorway, I paused, something drew me back. The far wall of the boardroom, where my father had once insisted we hang 3 framed pieces, the original company charter, the first blueprint ever approved, and a black and white photo of him at age 28, covered in mud, standing over a half-built shopping center. Beneath it, in brass letters. "Do the right thing, even when no one's watching." That broke something in me. Not a tear. Not weakness. Something colder. Deeper. A final, hollow snap. I didn't look back. Down the hallway, the building echoed like a tomb. People watched from glass offices, some curious, some guilty, most indifferent. My own assistant avoided eye contact as I passed her desk. She knew. They all knew. In the parking lot, the wind had picked up. Gray clouds coiled above the skyline like vultures circling steel bones. I stood by my truck, keys dangling in my hand, and let the cold bite through my coat. I didn't drive off right away. I opened my phone. Not the text from Emma I hadn't replied to. Not the missed call from Dad. The email. The one I'd received 2 days earlier. From Ben Cartwright. Subject, Me Build Works, approval and capital release confirmed. I read it again. Slowly. Like a prayer carved in granite. It was done. The company was born. Brad thought he was burying me. He didn't realize I was already halfway through laying the foundation for something stronger. Something mine. I slid the phone back into my pocket and drove off, not in defeat. In preparation. Because if Brad wanted war, he should have thought twice before lighting the match with dry timber under his feet. And he'd made one fatal miscalculation. He thought I was alone. Some men scream when you stab them in the back. I prefer to bleed in silence, and make sure you're the one who drowns in it. I didn't go home after the boardroom ambush. I drove west, past the edge of Des Moines, through a stretch of industrial parks and abandoned warehouses where the city forgot to keep pretending. There, on the second floor of an old accounting building, sat a tiny office with no nameplate. Just a keypad, a dusty window, and my future. Me Build Works wasn't much to look at yet. A leased office, 2 rooms, second-hand furniture, and a Keurig that wheezed like it had asthma. But it had something Ellison and Company no longer did, freedom. Mine. I dropped my keys on the desk and stared at the wall for a long time. Not thinking. Just, breathing. Processing. They'd cut me out like I was a tumor. Brad made it look clinical, strategic. But it wasn't strategy. It was fear, dressed in a suit and called restructuring. And fear, I had learned, could be used like a lever. I opened my laptop, and pulled up the contracts. 5, to be exact. Not stolen. Not coerced. Earned. Ben Cartwright was the first. His email 2 weeks ago had been short. If you leave, we leave with you. You know how to build. Your brother knows how to dress. Tanner Morgan from Visterize was next. Then Sophia Reyes from Alder Point Commercial. James Monroe from Iron Ridge. And finally, Victor Chong from Northbridge Capital. These weren't just clients. They were anchors, long-standing relationships I had nurtured through sweat, storms, and late-night crisis calls no consultant ever answered. They didn't follow me because of my title. They followed because they knew I wouldn't let their buildings fall. And now, without lifting a finger, without whispering a word against my brother, those clients were pulling out of Ellison and Company like bolts from a steel joint. One by one. Clean. Quiet. Lethal. Brad wouldn't even see the cracks forming until the beams gave way. But I wasn't done. I needed closure. I needed clarity. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. So the next morning, I returned to Ellison and Company headquarters. I wore the same coat, the same boots. Walked through the same lobby where my father's plaque still hung, words engraved in brass. We build more than buildings. We build trust. I wondered if anyone even read it anymore. The receptionist froze when she saw me. Mr. Ellison. I thought. I'm just here to pick up something personal, I said, calm. Firm. She hesitated, then buzzed me through. My old office hadn't been reassigned yet. It still smelled like me, coffee, steel, and frustration. The lights buzzed. The air was stale. But there, on the shelf, was what I came for, or pretended to, my father's old pocket watch. Solid brass, scratched from years of use. He gave it to me the day I became a full partner. It's yours now, he'd said. Because time should belong to those who spend it right. But I hadn't come for the watch. I came for the laptop. Still sitting on the desk. Still logged in under my name. Security hadn't wiped it yet. Maybe Brad didn't think I'd come back. Maybe he figured a man humiliated wouldn't dare revisit his grave. He forgot one thing. I don't run from ghosts. I sat down and opened the drive. At first, everything looked routine, project files, drafts, cost sheets. But I knew where to look. I'd worked under Brad long enough to recognize his file naming habits. Buried 3 folders deep, I found one labeled Q2 Planning_Archive. Inside it, a subfolder with no name. Inside that, emails. Memos. A presentation slide with my photo, red bordered. Obstacle to progressive restructuring. Legacy risk, resistant to change. Recommend termination Q2 2025 for optimal transition optics. The first email in the chain was dated March 15, 2023. 2 years ago. Brad had been planning my removal before Dad had even officially stepped down. Another document, an internal memo to a board advisor. If we eliminate Mark, we unlock clean approval for loan package B47. Banks hesitant with dual leadership model. He hadn't just wanted me gone. He needed me gone. To secure financing. To leverage the company's future for his bloated expansion dreams. I wasn't a partner to him. I was a liability. A speed bump on his fast track to empire. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen, heart steady. I thought of Dad. Of the nights he spent sleeping in his truck at job sites. Of the burns on his arms, the grit in his eyes. Of the way he'd always told us, build slow. Build strong. Fast work falls apart. Brad never listened. He thought buildings, like reputations, could be photoshopped into place. But now, I had the blueprints to his betrayal. Proof. I downloaded everything onto a flash drive. Then I wiped the laptop clean myself. Not out of fear. Out of finality. He tried to erase me from the company. Now I would erase myself, from his reach. As I walked out, I passed the conference room. The same one where I had been executed 2 days before. Empty now. Hollow. Echoing. I paused for just a second, staring through the glass. The chairs still sat where they had during the meeting. My seat, still pushed back slightly, where I had stood. Like a scar. I didn't feel anger. I felt precision. Purpose. I walked out of Ellison and Company for the second time. The first time, I left empty-handed. This time, I carried a warhead in my pocket. And Brad? He was too busy posing as a king to realize the walls of his castle were already crumbling, brick by brick, client by client, lie by lie. The first sign that the walls were beginning to crack came 3 days after I walked out of Ellison and Company for the last time. I was in the middle of reviewing foreman resumes at Me Build Works, still operating from that modest, windowless office above the accountant's practice, when Ben Cartwright called. "They pulled the plug," he said without preamble. "Who did?" "Ellison." "Brad." "Official notice. All existing projects terminated as of this morning. Legal says they're claiming breach of exclusivity due to our decision to work with you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Ben sighed. "They're panicking, Mark. The banks must have started circling." I stared down at my desk where 5 hard-earned relationships had been laid out like steel beams waiting for assembly. I'd spent months building quietly, never poaching, never overstepping, just offering an open door when the time came. And now that door had turned into a damn floodgate. An hour later, I got a call from Tanner Morgan. Then Sophia Reyes. Then James Monroe. Then Victor Chong. Every one of them had received the same notice from Ellison and Company, termination, effective immediately. No explanation, no courtesy. Brad wasn't playing defense anymore. He was throwing punches in the dark, hoping something would land. But the real blow came from the other direction. That same afternoon, I got a voicemail from my father. His voice sounded strained. Cold. Controlled in the way that only meant one thing: he was furious. "Mark. The bank called me. Our bank. They want clarification on the financing packages tied to the projects you've, apparently taken. They say they're re-evaluating loan terms due to changes in projected revenue. We need to talk." I called him back immediately. He didn't answer. But I didn't need him to. I knew what had happened. The 5 clients Brad built his fantasy empire around, Cartwright, Visterize, Alderpoint, Iron Ridge, Northbridge, were no longer names on a whiteboard. They were gone. Officially. Publicly. And the banks, who had extended Brad credit based on promises of revenue that no longer existed, were pulling the emergency brake. That night, Brad snapped. He sent out a company-wide internal memo to every subcontractor, supplier, and specialty firm tied to Ellison and Company. It read, in part: "Any contractor found to be working with Me Build Works or Mr. Mark Ellison directly will be permanently blacklisted from all current and future Ellison projects. Zero tolerance. Zero exceptions." Within 72 hours, over 80% of my team, framers, electricians, plumbers, site managers, called to pull out. "I'm sorry, Mark," they all said. "We believe in you. But we can't risk losing Ellison." I didn't blame them. Fear is a brutal motivator. So is hunger. Most of these guys had families. Mortgages. College tuition to pay. They weren't loyalists, they were survivors. Brad had thrown a line of fire between me and my workforce, and they weren't equipped to cross it. By the end of the 3rd day, my carefully laid plans were crumbling like poorly mixed concrete. Projects were stalled. Timelines upended. I was hemorrhaging credibility. And Brad? He was still smiling in interviews. Still spinning the story of a necessary generational shift to any trade magazine that would listen. He'd turn me into a ghost. But ghosts have a nasty habit of showing up when you least expect them. That weekend, I received an unexpected invitation from Carl, the same uncle who had kept his mouth shut during the boardroom ambush. Emergency board meeting. Monday morning. Full attendance required. No agenda listed. I knew what it meant. They were trying to decide what to do about me. About the crater Brad had made, and was now pretending didn't exist. And for once, I wasn't going to walk in unarmed. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Same boardroom. Same fluorescent hum. Same hollow tension. But this time, I walked in with purpose. No suit. No tie. Just a folder, thick with truth. Brad was already there, lounging at the head of the table like a man waiting for applause. He didn't even flinch when I walked in. Decided to come back and beg, he said under his breath as I took a seat at the far end. I smiled coldly. Not exactly. Carl cleared his throat. Let's begin. The purpose of today's session is to address escalating concerns regarding me build works, recent client transitions, and the financial implications for Ellison and Company. Brad jumped in before anyone else could speak. Let's not dance around it. Mark has been actively sabotaging this company. Poaching our clients. Undermining operations. And now he's trying to collapse our subcontractor network. My turn. I opened the folder and slid a handful of printed emails across the table. These are from Brad, I said quietly. 2 years ago. Sent to select board members and financial advisors. In them, he outlines a deliberate plan to eliminate me as an obstacle to secure bank approval for high-risk expansion loans. I let the words hang. Then I passed around copies of the internal memo, the one with my face framed in red, labeled Legacy Risk. And finally, the kicker, Brad's blacklisting email, printed in full, signed and time-stamped. I didn't steal anything, I continued. I didn't violate contracts. I didn't solicit a single client while I was employed here. What I did was survive. And build something, quietly, because I knew this day would come. Carl looked pale. Lisa from legal covered her mouth. Mike from finance, who'd backed Brad's expansion model, was visibly sweating. I looked directly at my brother. You wanted me out, Brad. You made that clear. But you didn't just push me out of a company, you pushed the foundation out from under your own damn house. Brad stood, furious now, mask cracking. I did what I had to do. Someone had to drag this place into the 21st century. You were holding us back. Dad was holding us back. He turned to the board. This is what happens when you let sentimental fossils run the show. I was trying to save us. From him. From a management style stuck in 1989. The silence that followed was brutal. Then Carl spoke, voice steady and tired. Brad, the bank called again this morning. They're calling in the loans. We're out of time. Brad opened his mouth. Closed it. He sat down like a man suddenly aware he was standing on a trapdoor. I stood. I'll leave you all to your decision. But understand this, Brad didn't just lie to me. He lied to you. And now you're paying the interest. I turned and walked out. Not with rage. With relief. Because I hadn't just exposed him. I'd made sure the entire room saw the cracks he tried to paper over with charm and buzzwords. And unlike Brad, I knew something about buildings. When the foundation's bad, it always collapses from the inside. I didn't sleep the night after the board meeting. I sat in my office, if you could call a 2-room rented space with flickering lights and a cracked window an office, and stared at the floor plans for the Crestwell complex. My pen hovered above the scheduling chart, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. I'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. Brad was cornered. The board had finally seen through his glass promises and buzzword-laced nonsense. The bank had made its position clear, if I walked, they would walk too. Every loan, every line of credit Brad had leveraged would turn into a guillotine the moment I withdrew my name from the game. But Ellison and Company wasn't just Brad. It was my father. It was the men and women I'd worked beside for 2 decades. It was the name on the steel beams of every project I'd shepherded from dirt to skyline. I didn't want to burn it down. I just wanted to own what I'd built. So I called Ben Cartwright first. Ben, I said. I need a favor. He laughed. I figured you might. You want me to move all 5 projects back to Ellison? Not quite. I want to split them. Split? 3 go back to Ellison. 2 stay with me Buildworks. He was quiet for a beat. That's generous. Why? Because if Ellison collapses, too many people get buried under it. I don't want to win by watching a building fall on my father. He exhaled, the way someone does when they realize they're not dealing with the man they thought you were. You always were the one who made things stand up straight, he said. I made 4 more calls that night. Each conversation was similar, brief confusion, concern, resistance. Then slow, cautious agreement. No one liked Brad. But they trusted me. That was enough. The next morning, I met with Lisa from legal, off the record, away from Ellison and Company. She was tired, like the whole last week had aged her. I'll draft it, she said. But Mark, this will require blood. I brought my own pen, I told her. 2 days later, I stood once again in the Ellison boardroom. No press this time. No crowd. Just the core, Carl, Lisa, Mike from finance, and Brad. And my father, sitting at the far end, not in his usual place, not at the head, but on the side, like a witness. The room was silent when I entered. Brad looked like hell. His collar was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The cocky glint in his stare had dulled into something resentful and cornered. Good. He should feel that cage around him. I placed the proposal on the table. This is what I'm offering, I said flatly. 3 of the 5 major clients returned to Ellison and Company. The other 2 remain with me Buildworks. I retain full rights to those projects, personnel, and vendor contracts. Brad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. There's more. Brad steps down as CEO. Effective immediately. Dad returns in a temporary capacity until a new CEO is installed. Carl glanced at me, brows raised. I've already contacted someone, I added. Diane Mitchell. That got a reaction. Even Brad stiffened. She's a damn bulldog, he muttered. She also knows how to build, I replied. And she's not afraid of cleaning up someone else's mess. You should remember that, Brad. She cleaned up yours once in Seattle. Brad's jaw clenched. He remembered. In 2018, he tried to swing a risky acquisition with a mid-tier developer. Diane had shredded his proposal in front of the entire negotiation team and called it a house of cards glued together with arrogance. She was the last person he wanted walking into this room. But she was the only person I trusted not to let sentiment rot the foundation again. Brad's eyes flicked to my father, who hadn't said a word. Dad didn't look angry. He looked old. Tired. He just nodded. And Brad knew. He picked up the pen. Held it for a moment. Then signed. The sound was barely audible, but to me, it was thunder. As he slid the document back across the table, he muttered, barely above a whisper. You won because I thought you were weak. Turns out, you're the only one here with fangs. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, Brad understood the one truth he'd never accepted. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the foundation. And he'd spent 2 years trying to cut through rebar with a plastic blade. When I left the building that day, I didn't feel light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man who'd finally poured the last inch of concrete into a cracked foundation and walked away knowing it wouldn't collapse this time. Ellison and Company would survive, but only just. And me Buildworks. Now it would grow. Not out of revenge. But from the solid, brutal peace that comes when you stop bleeding for a name that no longer deserves you. 6 months passed. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady, like steel rising, beam by beam. The old office above the accountant's practice was long gone. Me Buildworks now occupied a clean, sharp-lined space in the industrial district's newly revitalized core. Concrete floors, glass conference rooms, exposed ducts, nothing fancy, but solid. Functional. Built like we were. We had 38 employees. 5 active projects. A waitlist that stretched into next year. Not bad for a company born from exile and built on silence. But the moment that meant the most didn't come in a boardroom or on a construction site. It came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Emma brought a friend by the office after school. I was reviewing blueprints in the corner conference room when I heard the door open and her voice echo through the front lobby, proud, excited, unfiltered. "This is my dad's company," she said. "He built it himself." Her friend, a shy redhead with braces, whispered something I couldn't hear. Emma laughed. "No, not like Legos. Like real buildings. Grown-up buildings." I froze. There it was. Not revenge. Not victory. Just that one moment. Recognition. I stepped into the hallway, still holding the blueprint roll. She looked up at me, eyes bright. "You busy?" she asked. I shook my head. "Never too busy for you." She smiled, gave me a quick hug, and then turned back to showing off the break room like it was Google's headquarters. For the first time in a long time, I let myself smile too. Because I hadn't just built a company. I'd rebuilt what mattered. Ellison and Company survived, but just barely. The massive expansion plans were gone. The executive floor was stripped down. No more fancy sculptures or imported wall art. Diane Mitchell came in like a wrecking crew in heels, practical, ruthless, unsentimental. She cut dead weight. Rebuilt relationships. Stabilized the company's finances like she was stitching up a wounded soldier. Brad, for his part, had vanished. Rumor said he took a consulting job in Denver. I never verified it. Didn't care to. We hadn't spoken since the day he signed the agreement. He was a name on paper now. Nothing more. The building remained. But the story inside it had changed. I got the call from Dad a few weeks before the company's anniversary event. "I want you to come by," he said. "There's something you should see." I hesitated. "Don't worry," he added. "Brad won't be there." So I went. Walking into the Ellison and Company headquarters again was strange. Familiar and foreign, like returning to a childhood home after someone else had repainted the walls. The elevator was the same. The hallway carpet had been replaced. The boardroom lights were brighter now. But the biggest change sat at the end of the hallway, a new gallery wall. 3 photographs. The first was of my grandfather, sleeves rolled up, standing in front of 2 rusty pickup trucks and a wheelbarrow. The second, my father, breaking ground on the Lakeside Mall project in 1988, beaming beneath a hard hat. And the third was me. Shaking hands with the mayor in front of the Meridian Tower. My face lined from stress, smile small, but real. Beneath them was a new brass plaque. 3 generations. 1 foundation. My throat tightened. Dad stepped up beside me, slower than before, cane tapping gently. "Diane's idea," he said. "Said we needed to stop pretending the company was built by one man. That it stands because of what all 3 of us poured into it." I didn't speak. Couldn't. He looked at me. "You built something good, son. Not just here. Out there. You didn't just survive, you created." I nodded, slowly. "Thanks for putting that photo up," I said, finally. Dad shook his head. "Wasn't me. Diane insisted. She said if people are going to understand what this place means, they need to see the whole story." He paused. "Even the parts that got left out before." A week later, I met Ben Cartwright for drinks. It had become a habit, Friday evenings, same booth at Redstone Bar and Grill. He liked bourbon. I stuck with club soda. After small talk about supply chains and zoning board delays, Ben set his glass down and leaned forward. I ever tell you about how you got your startup loan? I raised an eyebrow. Valley First approved it after my pitch. Good credit. Solid projections. Ben smirked. Valley First wouldn't give a dime to a man just fired from a regional construction firm with no assets and no crews. I frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying I called in a favor, he said. Told them if they didn't back you, I'd pull every holding from their investment division. Made it very clear. Quiet, but clear. I sat back, stunned. You did that for me? He nodded. Because when everything fell apart, you didn't take the low road. You didn't beg. Didn't burn it down. You just started building again. He lifted his glass in a small toast. I invested in something stronger than concrete, Mark. I invested in your name. I didn't know what to say. So I said what I meant. Thank you. He nodded. Just keep proving me right. Looking back, the fall wasn't the hardest part. The silence was. The nights when I wondered if I had wasted 2 decades. If walking away meant erasing my name from every beam I ever helped raise. But I know better now. Because buildings can fall. Reputations can be rewritten. But the way you carry yourself, your integrity, your word, your willingness to stand when someone else kicks your legs out from under you, that stays. That's what people remember. That's what survives. Not the name on the building. But the man who built it right, even after they took his tools away. A name carved in stone doesn't make a legacy. But doing what's right, when no one's watching, when it costs you everything, that's the foundation that endures.